What is a prenup? Probably heard that on television or on social media. You think prenups are for rich people who have a lot of assets. It probably is for them, but it also may be for you. A prenup is a abbreviation of a prenuptial agreement, which means an agreement before you marry somebody. And so when you get married to someone, you essentially are going to have family assets. You're going to have property that could be divided because it comes up throughout your marriage. Even if you have some money sitting aside or an inheritance or all these kind of things that could come into play that you may get during your marriage from something that had nothing to do with your marriage, those things could come up because it could get commingled into your family money and it becomes a family asset. So you may need a prenuptial agreement even if you don't have a lot of money right now. If you expect to inherit money, you may need an agreement before you marry about what happens if you divorce. Now, if you divorce, all your assets could come into play and be equitably divided by the court. So you've got to determine in advance before you're ever married what's going to happen if we divorce. And what's going to happen to my money if we divorce? What's going to happen to our house? What's going to happen to my inheritance? All of these things are important. You've got to realize that if you want to protect your assets, it's important to think ahead of time. And it's not just enough to draw up something and have the other person sign it and maybe even get it notarized. For a prenuptial agreement to be valid, both parties need a lawyer who are going to be able to represent their interests and advise them on the consequences of it and what it all means. And so don't go to a lawyer and sign a prenup without having your lawyer look over it. Just because their spouse drew up something today, you feel pressured into signing it, don't sign it if you feel pressured. Don't sign it until you have a lawyer review that prenuptial agreement with you to make sure that in the event you do divorce, that you're going to get a fair shot at what all you should have, because the length of the marriage could come into play, the circumstances leading to the divorce can come into play. You need to make sure you're represented, and you need to make sure you understand fully not only what's in there, but what it means for you. So what is a postnup or postnuptial agreement? Well, it means an agreement that happens after you marry. Now, these can happen at any point. Some people get married and then really quickly decide, hey, we should have signed a prenup. We need some kind of an agreement about the division of our assets if we were to divorce. Or maybe you and your spouse have had problems come up in your marriage and you realize that, hey, I'm not sure what's going to happen here long term. I want to try to work it out, but I want to make sure that my assets are protected. So you need to probably sign a post-nuptial agreement. That's a contract, basically, you're going to enter into with your spouse after you're married, but how your assets are going to be divided if certain things happen, like if a divorce occurs. How are all of your things, all your monetary assets, how are these things going to be divided if we divorce? It's totally possible after you're married to sign an agreement like that, just like a prenup happens before you're married. And so you may need to sign a post-nuptial agreement that simply lays out how all of your stuff is going to be divided, how any inheritances come into your family, how any business that's grown during your marriage, how these things will be divided in the event you divorce. So it may not come up just because you've had problems. It may be because your financial situation has changed. A variety of things could lead you to the need to sign a post-nuptial agreement. But I want to encourage you, if your circumstances are different today than when you married, whether it's personally, monetarily, or any other way, you need to talk to a lawyer about signing a post-nuptial agreement. You probably wonder, when should I consider a prenuptial agreement or a postnup? Some people think of it as a really sensitive topic because you think, well, my spouse is going to think I don't trust them if I have them sign a prenup. Or maybe they won't want to marry me if I ask them to sign a prenup. Or maybe they even think, do I trust them enough if I'm going to make them sign an agreement like this? Or even worse yet, am I planning to divorce just because we sign a prenup or a postnup? The answer to all those things is no, probably not any of those things. What's going on is you need to make sure that in the event that something occurs you don't want to happen, that you are protected. Also, that your children are protected, because what happens if you come into a marriage and you already have children? And those children are the product of a previous relationship or a previous marriage. And now you need to make sure that anything you brought into the marriage is going to be protected for those kids. Maybe it's inheritance that you receive that you want to make sure goes to your children and not to your spouse or to the children of your spouse or to your children you may have together. There's all kind of reasons you may need to consider signing a postnuptial or a prenuptial agreement. It doesn't mean you don't love the person. It doesn't mean you don't trust the person. And it doesn't mean you're planning to divorce. What it does mean is in the event that a divorce occurs, maybe through no fault of your own, that your assets and those you want to go to your children and your family are protected in a way that you feel most comfortable with by planning in advance. Because if you wait till the end, it's too late to do anything about it many times. So you may wonder, is a prenuptial agreement enforceable in Alabama? Yes. We are a state that really believes in the ability of individuals to contract for whatever they want to do, as long as it's not illegal or contrary to public policy. You can sign a prenup, and that prenup can be enforceable against the other party. Because if you're having to come to the point that you need to enforce it, that means some tragedy has occurred. Either your marriage is broken down or you're divorcing at this point, and you need to do something to enforce an agreement you've previously signed. As long as both parties have been represented by counsel, which is very important, you both need to have your own lawyer to review a prenup or a postnup agreement. When those have been agreed upon and advised by appropriate counsel, when it comes down to a litigation to enforce a postnup, you need to make sure that you've got somebody who's experienced in handling these issues, that knows all the little nuances that come into play, because they do need to know that you can handle this case in an appropriate way. We love helping people who have gone through really hard times to know that things don't have to be as bad as they are right now, and your divorce is not going to be going on forever. Eventually, it's going to be over, and you're going to move on to brighter days in your life. And when you do, you need to have the financial ability that you plan to have in advance to get through the life you want to at that point. So prenups absolutely are enforceable. And when you're trying to enforce them, it's very important to know that you have done everything in advance to prepare for the future you want to have. So if you have questions about a prenup or a postnup agreement, reach out to our office right now.